Humanity has faced its darkest hour, but now is the time to rise and fight back. Are you ready to see the ultimate showdown between mankind and the creatures that threaten our very existence? Drop a like, comment, Humanity FK yeah, and subscribe to join the battle and stay tuned for the next chapter of this epic journey. This is it. We're going in fast. Stay sharp. Captain Nadia Voss's voice crackled over the comms, cutting through the haze of tension that hung over the squad. Her fingers danced across the holographic controls as the dropship plummeted through the hostile atmosphere of the planet Iskath. Below, in the shadow of a broken moon, a forgotten prison lay buried beneath the red dust, a prison that had once held nothing but whispers of its existence. And now, it was their mission to liberate what was left. "We've got a live feed," Lieutenant Barron said, his fingers flying across his own console. "Infrared sweep shows. Thousands. Enslaved humans." The words hit the squad like a hammer. In the distance, the dark silhouette of the prison complex stood against the ash-gray sky, its walls scarred by 1,000 battles. Those walls hadn't seen humanity's blood in decades, but that was about to change. "They were never meant to be found," Voss muttered. "It's our job to make sure they're never forgotten again." The countdown flashed on her screen. 5 minutes to impact. The squad, a mix of hardened veterans and eager rookies, moved into position with military precision. The prison was more of a fortress than a facility, guarded by an alien empire that had been all too willing to exploit human labor. But something had changed. Something dangerous. And now, the empire had a price to pay. Voss's heartbeat steadied as she donned her helmet. Her mind wandered to the faces of those enslaved. She had seen this before, an entire human race crushed under the heel of a superior species. But this time, humanity would rise. Humanity would fight back. 5 seconds, Barron's voice broke through the static. "Brace for impact." The dropship hit the ground with a bone-rattling thud. The doors flew open before the dust could settle, and the squad surged out, into the enemy's territory, weapons raised, eyes sharp. Barron was first, his rifle barking as he sent a hail of bullets into the approaching guards. The prison's gates loomed before them. Massive, iron gates guarded by towering alien machines, but Voss was undeterred. The mission was clear. Breach, engage, liberate. Plasma charges, she ordered, and the explosives were set in an instant. With a deafening roar, the gates exploded, sending sparks flying in all directions. A blinding white light filled the air, and the squad moved in, taking advantage of the chaos. The air was thick with the scent of burning ozone. Gunfire erupted, and the alien forces countered with rapid fire, bursts of energy blasts. But humanity was used to the heat of battle. Humanity had been forged in war. Voss darted forward, dodging laser fire as she advanced, her rifle snapping to life. She took down a pair of guards, her shots precise and deadly, each one ringing out in the chaos. Barron covered her 6, his voice gruff through the comms. "Captain, we're making a dent, but these bastards have reinforcements," he shouted, gunning down an alien who was trying to flank them. Voss's teeth gritted. They were ready for this. They had to be. But it wasn't just the prison guards that made her skin crawl. It was the discovery of the humans enslaved within these walls. They were the reason they had come, and they would pay for what they did. As the team pushed deeper into the complex, the enemy's numbers seemed endless. But Voss was resolute, pushing forward, leaving no prisoners. As the team pushed deeper into the complex, the enemy's numbers seemed endless. But Voss was resolute, pushing forward, leaving no prisoners. They finally reached the central chamber, where the enslaved humans were being held in stasis pods, their bodies barely alive. A silent, haunted groan escaped from the group when they saw it. Dozens, maybe hundreds of human figures connected to the machine's network, their faces pale and drained. "God, what have they done?" Lieutenant Barron muttered, his face pale, as he looked around. Voss clenched her fists. "It doesn't matter. We're getting them out." Her voice was filled with fire. "Get those pods open." But just as they began cutting the human captives free, the loudest alarm they had yet heard blared throughout the prison. A massive, armored enemy force emerged from the shadows, 50 strong, each one towering, their energy shields shimmering. It was a slaughterhouse, and humanity had walked right into the middle of it. "Brace for—" "Too late!" Baron screamed, his voice frantic as he shoved Voss behind him. The first wave of fire was deadly. Baron's body jerked backward as a shot tore through his chest, his scream cut off mid-sentence. Voss's heart skipped a beat. She screamed his name as the squad scrambled into cover. "Baron, damn it! No!" Voss slammed a fresh energy clip into her rifle, her hand shaking with adrenaline. She darted out, firing without hesitation. The enemy was relentless, but so was she. The humans weren't going to die here. Not on her watch. The squad fought back with everything they had. Voss saw an opening and surged forward, her rifle blazing as she took down the first two of the armored guards. But just as they started to make progress, a loud, guttural growl echoed from the shadows. A massive figure, nearly 7 feet tall, stepped into the chamber, its body armored in dark, shimmering metal. Its face was covered by a helmet, but the cold, dead eyes behind it were unmistakable. It was their commander, and it was clear he wasn't just here to kill them. He was here to make an example of them. "Captain, look out!" shouted a voice from behind. Voss turned, but it was too late. The figure lunged. What will happen next? Will humanity survive this brutal assault? Stay tuned. "This is not over." Captain Nadia Voss spat the words through gritted teeth, her breath ragged from the vicious combat. Baron was gone. The thought of his body crumpled on the cold floor pushed her forward, a fire raging in her chest. They'd come for revenge, and they would get it. The massive figure that had stepped from the shadows loomed like a nightmare. The hulking alien commander, the warden, his body encased in obsidian armor, made a slow, deliberate approach. His footsteps shook the ground, every stride sending a tremor through the chamber. The squad was pinned down. Weapons fire flashed from every angle, but nothing seemed to faze the warden. His shield absorbed it all. "Captain!" Private Dalara's voice was urgent, breaking through the static in Voss's calm. "We need to fall back. There's no way through that thing." But Voss's mind was already racing. There was a way. There always was. "We don't fall back," Voss snapped. "We push forward. Everyone, focus on the warden's weak points. I'll create an opening." Her voice carried with the command of someone who had seen battle and understood one undeniable truth: humanity did not retreat. It did not surrender. The squad regrouped, adjusting their tactics in real time. Voss gave the signal, and the squad opened fire with precision. Barrage after barrage of plasma bolts and pulse shots rained down on the warden, but each shot pinged off his energy shield, leaving nothing but scorch marks. His armor was nearly indestructible, but Voss knew it wasn't invulnerable. She glanced at the control panel, where a holographic map of the facility flickered. There had to be a weak spot, some kind of structural vulnerability she could exploit. Her eyes darted across the screen. There, at the warden's back, the power grid that fed his armor, a single point of failure. Voss's mind clicked into overdrive. "Team, we need a breach on his backside." "The power grid." Private Carver nodded, already reaching for a heavy ion grenade. "On it, Captain." While Carver prepped the grenade, Voss and the rest of the squad provided suppressive fire, keeping the warden distracted as he advanced, smashing through walls with each step. It was clear the warden wasn't just a soldier, he was an executioner, and his target was humanity's soul. Voss watched as Carver moved in, ducking behind a shattered column. The ion grenade hissed in his hands, sizzling with energy. With a quick glance at Voss, Carver pulled the pin and lobbed it toward the warden's exposed rear. "Incoming!" The explosion erupted with a violent crackle, an electrical storm ripping through the warden's armor. His shield flickered, and for a brief moment, Voss saw her opening. Now! She shouted. The squad surged forward, their rifles roaring as they flooded the warden with every ounce of ammunition they had left. But it wasn't enough. The warden's monstrous form continued to move, albeit more sluggishly now. He had taken damage, but it wasn't enough to stop him. Not yet. Voss wasn't finished. Delara, cover me. I'm going in. With the rest of the squad providing what little cover fire they could, Voss sprinted forward, a blur of motion. Her boots slapped against the floor as she charged, her rifle held tight in her hands. She dove behind a wrecked console as the warden's weapon systems whirred to life, targeting her location. Don't think you'll escape. The warden's voice was a low, guttural growl, enhanced by a deep resonance in his helmet speaker. You are already dead! Voss's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. She knew fear. She'd faced it more times than she cared to remember. But right now, the only thing that mattered was the mission. Humanity's revenge. She leaped from cover, firing into the warden's exposed power core, now pulsing with unstable energy. The shots hit their mark, searing through the reinforced metal. Crack. The warden's shield flared out, flickering, and finally, the shield collapsed, a single moment of vulnerability. Voss didn't waste it. With a final, desperate sprint, she tackled the warden from behind, using all her weight to push him off balance. The shock of the impact rattled him, and his heavy frame staggered back. In that instant, Voss activated her last remaining explosive, an EMP grenade designed to disrupt the alien tech at a critical moment. Die with the rest of us, bastard. She hurled the grenade into the warden's exposed back. The EMP detonated with a deafening roar, sending shockwaves through the warden's systems. His body jerked violently as the electrical pulse fried his circuits. His shield died, his armor flickered, and his massive frame crumpled forward. Voss didn't hesitate. She grabbed her combat knife and drove it straight into the warden's exposed neck joint, just beneath the helmet. The sound of metal grinding against bone filled the air as she twisted the blade, severing vital connections. The warden let out a choked screech, a sound that echoed through the chamber. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the enemy. Commander fell, silent. The squad stood in stunned silence for a moment, their weapons still raised. The warden was down, but the battle wasn't over. Is it really over? Carver whispered, his voice raw with disbelief. Voss stood tall, her eyes narrowed in fury. No, this is just the beginning. Cliffhanger ending. As the squad caught their breath, the ground trembled beneath their feet. Something had shifted in the atmosphere, something darker, more ominous. Suddenly the prison lights flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. And then, a booming voice, unlike anything they had ever heard before, crackled through the speakers overhead. You may have killed the warden, but you've only awakened the true enemy. A series of heavy doors in the far distance began to open one by one, revealing something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Voss turned to her team, adrenaline surging once again. Get ready. This isn't over. We're in the belly of the beast now. Who, or what, is the true enemy? Find out in the next chapter. We've just poked the hornet's nest. Captain Nadia Voss's words hung in the air, laced with bitter irony. The warden, once thought to be their greatest threat, now lay motionless at her feet. But as the prison's lights flickered ominously, it was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. A deep, reverberating hum echoed through the prison complex as the ground shook again. A series of mechanical whirs sounded in the distance, far, far deeper within the structure. It wasn't the sound of one machine. It was the sound of many. This doesn't feel right, Private Delara said, her voice trembling. She scanned the hall, her pulse quickening as the feeling of being watched crept over her. Voss raised a hand, signaling for the squad to hold their positions. They had come too far to fall apart now. With Baron's death still fresh in her mind, the rage within her simmered. But even she could feel it, the growing unease, the gnawing suspicion that something far worse was lurking beneath the surface. "Eyes open," Voss barked. "We've got a long way to go. Check your corners. Stay sharp." But as she spoke, the answer to their growing dread revealed itself. A massive metal door, easily 50 feet tall, groaned as it opened with a thunderous crash. Beyond it, Voss could see only shadows, shifting, massive shapes moving within the darkness. The air grew colder, as if the very atmosphere had thickened. Then, a voice, a low growl, rumbled from within the black void. "You are not welcome here." The voice was not alien, but distinctly human, disturbingly so. It was rich with power, distorted with something inhuman. Voss's blood ran cold. "Voss." "What the hell is that?" Delara whispered, wide-eyed and shaking. Voss didn't respond immediately. She was too busy processing what she had just heard. The voice, unmistakably human, but twisted, like it had been corrupted by something far darker, far older. And then, the shadows began to move. From the depths of the darkened chamber emerged monstrous figures, towering and inhuman. They were human-shaped but disfigured, their bodies grotesque parodies of humanity. Their skin was stretched and pale, eyes glowing with an eerie light. The air around them shimmered with a strange, unnatural energy. "What the hell are those?" Carver muttered, his voice cracking as his rifle shook in his hands. The creatures moved with terrifying speed, their long, clawed fingers reaching toward the squad. "Those aren't humans. Those are—" Voss's voice trailed off as her mind raced. The solution was right there. The warden had been a puppet, a tool. These were the true soldiers. But what had done this to them? "Bio-renovations," she said grimly. "These are the result of bioengineering experiments. People, twisted into something else." Suddenly, one of the creatures lunged, its claws slicing through the air with an inhuman shriek. Voss dove to the side, her rifle spitting a stream of deadly fire. The creature's flesh sizzled under the impact, but it kept coming, unfazed. "Open fire!" Voss screamed. The squad erupted into action. Bullets tore through the air, but the creatures were faster than anything they had faced. One of them dodged a shot with unnerving precision, diving toward Delara, who barely had time to react. She slammed her back into the wall, narrowly escaping. The creature's claws as they scraped against the metal. "Fall back," Voss ordered, her voice harsh. But she knew it was too late. There was no way to retreat with these monsters hot on their heels. They were surrounded. Every angle was covered. The only way out was forward, through the heart of the prison. The air around the creatures pulsed with energy as they closed in, their movements unsettlingly fluid. The squad's fire began to slow. What they were up against was not just fast, but resilient. It wasn't just about strength or speed. These creatures had been engineered to survive and to hunt. Delara fired a burst, hitting one of the creatures in the chest. It staggered but didn't fall. Instead, its glowing eyes locked onto her, and it charged. "Delara!" Voss shouted, but the private didn't have time to react. She only had time to fire one last shot before the creature tackled her to the ground, its claws ripping through her armor like paper. Voss didn't wait. She moved. The squad had already taken heavy casualties, and they couldn't afford to lose another. She sprinted forward, her pulse pounding in her ears as she closed the gap between her and the creature. With a swift, brutal motion, she drove her knife deep into its skull, piercing the soft tissue behind the creature's ear. The thing froze, then crumpled to the floor, its body twitching once before lying still. But the victory was short-lived. The remaining creatures screeched, rallying around. The squad. They were outnumbered and outmatched, but Voss wasn't about to let her team fall. Not today. She turned to Carver. "Get to the control room. We need to shut this place down. Now!" Carver nodded, firing wildly to clear a path. Voss could see his hands trembling with fear, but his movements were precise. Delara's death weighed heavily on them all, but Voss didn't have time to mourn. Not yet. "Move. Now!" she barked, shoving him forward. The squad made a break for it, charging into the chaos, cutting down creatures as they advanced. With each step, the terror of being surrounded, of being outclassed, gnawed at their resolve. But they pressed on, just. As they reached the control room, the walls shook again. The lights flickered violently, and then the ground began to tremble in earnest. A deep, bone-rattling sound emerged from deep within the facility, a sound that made Voss's stomach churn. "What the hell is that?" Carver gasped, his eyes wide with horror. Voss's heart sank. The air around them was thick with power. Something huge was coming. The control panel buzzed to life, but the interface blinked erratically, showing static and distorted images. The comms crackled. Then from the shadows in the far corner of the room, a deep, guttural growl echoed. Something was coming. Something far worse than the creatures they had already fought. A massive armored figure stepped forward, human in shape but utterly alien in appearance. Its armor was a twisted living material, shifting with an otherworldly energy. Its eyes, glowing and filled with intelligence, focused on Voss and her team. "You are too late," the figure's voice echoed with finality. The true beast of the prison had finally made its appearance. Who or what is the true leader of this nightmare? Stay tuned for the next chapter. Humanity's fight is about to reach its bloody climax. Like, comment, we never surrender, and subscribe to keep the fight alive. We've walked into a war zone, and I don't think we're walking out of this one. Captain Nadia Voss's words were sharp, but there was no time to dwell on them. The truth was already slapping them in the face. This battle was no longer just about the prison or even the enslaved humans. It was about survival. And the stakes? They were beyond anything the squad could have imagined. The armored figure that had emerged from the shadows towered over them, its body encased in a shifting black armor that hummed with energy. The armor wasn't just protective. It was alive, pulsating with an alien rhythm, almost as if it were part of the being itself. Its eyes, two glowing orbs of malevolent energy, were locked on Voss, as if it knew exactly who to blame for everything that had gone wrong. "I see you, human," the figure's voice rumbled, sending a chill through Voss's spine. "You have disrupted everything. You should never have come here." There was no mistaking it now. This was the mastermind behind the nightmare, the true enemy, the source of the terror. The figure stepped forward, its movements fluid but heavy, as though each step carried the weight of thousands of lives lost. Who are you?" Voss demanded, forcing her voice to stay steady, despite the adrenaline rushing through her veins. The figure tilted its head, and the air seemed to crackle with the sheer power of its presence. "I am what remains of humanity's ambition. The ambition. I was the product of a dream, and now I am your nightmare." The creature raised one hand, and in an instant, the ground beneath the squad began to rumble. The walls of the control room started to bend and warp, the metal groaning. As if under immense pressure, the squad stumbled, trying to maintain their footing, but it was clear. This wasn't a battle they could win through brute force alone. Voss's eyes narrowed as she scanned the figure, trying to understand it, trying to find a weakness. There was nothing about this being that screamed human, but it was, the last of them. The creature's gaze never left Voss, and its voice came again, dripping with disdain. "You think you can defeat me, Captain? You think your pitiful weapons can stop what has evolved beyond your understanding?" Voss clenched her fists, forcing down the fear threatening to rise. "We'll find a way," she muttered under her breath. "We always do. Move, move, move!" Voss shouted, snapping the squad into action as the armored figure began to raise its hand. The ground split apart in a jagged arc, and from the cracks in the floor, a flood of alien creatures poured in, more of the twisted, bioengineered monstrosities that had been terrorizing the squad. "We need to get to the main reactor," Voss shouted, barely hearing herself over the chaos. The control room was being overrun, and they couldn't hold it. The power of the enemy commander, whatever it was too overwhelming. "Carver, get to the reactor controls. The rest of you, provide cover." Carver, his face pale but determined, nodded and sprinted toward the door, leading to the heart of the facility. Voss covered him, firing relentlessly into the wave of creatures that came at them. Her rifle screamed, rounds tearing through flesh and bone, but it felt like a futile gesture. There were too many of them, and the air was thick with their foul stench. As Carver reached the door to the reactor core, it slammed shut in his face. "Damn it," Voss cursed, firing a quick burst at a creature that lunged at her. "We need to open it manually. Delara, cover me." Delara, though pale and bloodied from the earlier fight, snapped to action, dropping to her knees to provide suppressive fire while Voss darted toward the reactor door. The walls of the control room shook as the armored figure advanced, its every movement causing ripples in the air. Voss could feel it, the weight of inevitability. She could almost hear the voice of the warden again, the same cold promise of humanity's defeat. "We are the end of you." Voss ignored it. She was no longer a soldier just following orders. She was fighting for something much bigger now. For every life lost, for every soul enslaved, she was going to make them pay. As Voss slammed her shoulder into the reactor door, trying to force it open, she heard it. A low hum, barely noticeable at first, but then louder. The air around her seemed to vibrate with energy, and suddenly the door opened wide. Inside the reactor core, power lines hummed with blinding blue energy, crackling and sparking as they powered up, feeding into the massive core at the center. Carver was already at a control panel, his hands flying over the interface, trying desperately to gain access. "I'm in," Carver muttered. "I've got control over the reactor. We can overload it, but it'll take a few minutes to set the charges." "Do it," Voss said, her voice tight. "We don't have that long." Suddenly the ground shook again, but this time it wasn't just a tremor. The entire facility was shaking, the walls cracking as though something far worse than the creatures had been unleashed. Voss glanced up, her eyes narrowing. The armored figure was standing in the doorway, its face illuminated by the flickering lights. Its cold, emotionless voice echoed across the room. "You cannot stop it." Voss's breath caught in her throat as the walls of the reactor room began to bend outward, the entire facility starting to buckle under the pressure. Carver's voice was frantic as he turned to Voss. "We've only got one shot at this." "We don't have much time." Voss didn't wait for a second invitation. She dove toward the control panel, ignoring the sound of battle raging behind her, and helped Carver finish the final adjustments. Every instinct told her this was a risk. This might very well be the last thing she ever did. But humanity's future depended on it. The sound of a monstrous roar echoed through the chamber as the figure moved forward. The creatures that had been swarming the squad suddenly fell back, retreating into the shadows as if commanded. Voss felt her heart race as the countdown flashed across the control panel. 3, 2, 1. Boom. Cliffhanger. Ending. The facility exploded in a burst of blinding light. The shockwave slammed into Voss and the others, throwing them across the room like rag dolls. The sound was deafening, the blast deafening. And then, silence. Through the haze of smoke and debris, Voss struggled to rise, her body bruised and battered. The reactor was gone. But had it worked? Had they destroyed the core of the facility? And more importantly, had they killed the thing that haunted them? From the wreckage, a voice, the voice, sounded again, louder than ever, reverberating through. "The ruins. This is not over." Voss's eyes widened as she stumbled to her feet. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. What's left to fight? And who, or what, survives the blast? Stay tuned for the next chapter, humanity's darkest hour. Maybe upon them. We're not done. Not yet. Captain Nadia Voss's voice was a low, guttural growl, her words fueled by defiance and the burning rage that had been building since they first discovered the enslaved humans. The explosion had rocked the facility to its very core, but the rumble of the earth beneath them was far from over. Voss, struggling against the disorienting aftereffects of the blast, pushed herself upright. Her head spun, her vision blurred by the dust and the remnants of the crumbling prison around her. Carver was the first to reach her, extending a hand to help her steady herself. His face was smeared with dirt, his body battered and bloodied. But his eyes, those eyes were still burning with that same fierce determination. "Captain, you good?" Voss blinked rapidly, shaking off the haze. "I'm fine. Get up. We've got work to do." Her team, though battered, was alive. Delara, who had barely escaped the creature's claws earlier, stood shakily to her feet, her face pale but resolute. The rest of the squad was in similar shape, exhausted, injured, but still standing. They were human, and that meant something. It meant they could still fight. The room around them was still trembling from the aftermath of the reactor's explosion. The prison was crumbling, sections of the walls collapsing as the very foundation of the facility started to buckle. The lights flickered sporadically, casting long, menacing shadows. For a moment, there was silence. Only the distant sound of crumbling stone and the unsettling hum of the facility's power system sputtering to a halt. "Where's the bastard?" Delara muttered, her voice shaking as she looked around, scanning the debris. But Voss didn't need to ask. She could already feel it, the presence. It wasn't over. The air shifted again, thick with an unnatural energy. The ground beneath their feet started to quiver, and a low, bone-rattling growl filled the room, echoing off the crumbling walls. The true enemy wasn't dead. With a chilling clarity, the walls surrounding them suddenly split apart, and the massive armored figure they had faced before, the one who had called itself the end of humanity, emerged from the smoke. But it wasn't the same. It had changed. Its armor, once dark and impenetrable, now glowed with a pulsing, fiery light. The energy radiating from it distorted the air around it, making the creature appear larger, almost monstrous, as though it had absorbed the explosion and come out stronger. The cold, emotionless faceplate that had once been a simple visor was now adorned with jagged edges, flickering with blue and red energy, like the creature itself had been reborn, made more powerful, more deadly, more inhuman. "You're persistent, Captain." The voice echoed in their minds, its tone darker, more commanding. "But you are out of time. Humanity's time is over. The end begins now." Voss's breath caught in her throat. "We've been through worse. We'll go through it again. But..." As the words left her lips, a wave of energy pulsed outward from the creature. It swept across the room, pushing the squad back with a force so powerful that they were knocked off their feet, their bodies slamming into the debris strewn across the floor. "This is it," Carver gasped as he fought to regain his footing. "We can't stop it. It's too strong." Voss gritted her teeth. No, this wasn't how it was going to end. Humanity didn't bend, it didn't break, it didn't lose. Her hands shook as she grasped her rifle, instinctively turning it toward the creature, but the weapon felt insignificant. The creature stood like a god, untouchable and indomitable. "We're not done." Voss's voice was firm, her gaze steely. She refused to be intimidated. "We finish what we started." A strange, haunting laugh echoed from the figure. The air vibrated with the sound, sending a shiver down the spines of the squad. But Voss wasn't about to give in to fear. She reached into her armor, pulling out a small silver device, an ancient prototype that had once been a last-ditch weapon against overwhelming odds. A do-or-die option they had only brought out as a contingency. "We've got one shot at this," Voss muttered, activating the device. It hummed to life in her palm, sending a pulse of energy through her body. "It's time we end this." The squad was on their feet again, but the figure, now seemingly omnipotent, advanced with terrifying calm, not bothered by their feeble attacks. It raised one hand, sending a wave of power toward them, but before the energy could reach them, Voss hurled the device into the air. "Now!" she shouted. The device exploded in a burst of light so blinding that it cut through the darkness, turning everything white. For a split second, Voss felt her heart skip a beat, a feeling of weightlessness enveloping her as time seemed to slow. Then, the explosion detonated in a massive shockwave, forcing the creature to stagger back. The energy around it wavered, as if the pulse had momentarily stripped it of its invulnerability. The glowing armor flickered, losing some of its edge. The creature's voice rang out in a final, furious scream, but it was too late. The power of the device had done its job. Voss didn't wait. She was already on the move, charging forward, with the last of her strength. Her rifle was raised, the final rounds left inside it ready to deal the final blow. The creature was still reeling, disoriented by the explosion. Voss aimed and fired, her shots exploding against the creature's weakened armor, the force of each round shaking the very air. And then, with a final, deafening screech, the figure fell to its knees. Its energy shield flickered, its armor cracked. Its glowing eyes began to dim. Voss didn't give it a chance to recover. She dove forward, slamming her combat knife into the gap between its armored plates, striking the weak point she had seen earlier. Silence. The creature collapsed, its body crumpling to the floor with a heavy thud. The energy surrounding it finally faded, and with it, the oppressive atmosphere that had weighed down on the squad. For the first time in what felt like hours, Voss let out a shaky breath, her body sagging with exhaustion. But the victory, their victory, was hard-earned. And though the cost was high, humanity had endured. The squad stood in silence, staring at the fallen figure of the enemy commander. The prison around them was collapsing, the ceiling cracking as the building itself seemed to fight back in its death throes. But as Voss turned to her team, her expression grim, a low hum began to fill the room again. This time, it wasn't from the creature. It was coming from the ground beneath them. Voss looked down at the cracks forming in the floor. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. What new threat will humanity face in the next chapter? Will the squad survive the crumbling prison? Will humanity rise from the ashes? There's no way out. Captain Nadia Voss's voice was thick with realization. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the prison, now a dying, crumbling carcass, seemed to fall apart piece by piece. The walls groaned, the ceiling cracked, and dust rained down like the remnants of a shattered world. The reactor had been destroyed, the last of the bioengineered horrors vanquished, and yet there was no peace. No victory, not yet. She scanned the room, her mind racing for a plan, but it was becoming clear that the answers they sought were slipping away. Voss glanced at her squad, each of them battered, bruised, and fatigued from the hellish battle they had just endured. Carver, Delara, and the others were still standing, but barely. Every step, every breath was a reminder of how much they'd been through. But no matter how exhausted they were, they could still feel it. The undeniable hum beneath their feet. Something was coming. We're trapped, Delara said, her voice unsteady as she stumbled to her feet, looking at the decaying structure around them. Voss gritted her teeth. No, we're not. Not yet. The distant rumble of the collapsing prison filled the silence, and it seemed to get louder with every passing second. The walls were buckling. The entire facility was on the brink of collapse. But then it stopped. For a heartbeat, the prison was eerily quiet. And then the ground beneath them cracked open, sending a jolt of panic through their bodies. A deep, growling hum reverberated from the core of the facility, and suddenly a black void appeared where the floor had once been, an abyss that stretched infinitely downward. What the hell is that? Carver breathed, taking a step back. As the hole continued to widen, Voss didn't need to ask. She knew what it was. It was the true heart of the facility, the place that had been hidden beneath layers of deception, beneath the lies they had been fed about the nature of the prison and its purpose. And it was about to be their tomb. The squad scrambled, retreating from the widening chasm as the air grew thick with an unnatural energy. The sound of distant machinery echoed from below, distant but unmistakable, a hum that vibrated through the walls like the very heartbeat of the facility. Voss knew one thing for certain. If they didn't act now, they were all going to die. Here, buried under the rubble of their own folly. "We need to go down there," Voss said, her voice low but filled with conviction. Carver's face twisted with disbelief. "Captain, you're not serious. We can't go down there. There's nothing down there but death." "There's no choice, Carver." Voss's voice hardened. "That abyss is the key, and if we don't stop whatever's down there, we'll never leave this place." Delara, her hands shaking as she checked her weapons, looked to the others for a response. She caught Voss's eye and nodded grimly. "We go. If we don't, we die here. At least we're giving it a shot." The squad fell into line, each of them steeling themselves for what was about to come. Voss led the way, her heart pounding, as they approached the edge of the abyss. A set of rusted metal ladders descended into the darkness. The smell of burning metal and ozone filled the air, and the distant sound of clanking machines grew louder, as though something massive was stirring deep below. "Stay close. Stay quiet," Voss ordered. "We don't know what's down there, but we're going to find out." They descended into the depths of the prison, the air growing colder, more oppressive the farther they went. The walls were slick with condensation, and every step echoed, amplifying the silence around them. The only light came from their helmets, the weak glow of their flashlights cutting through the suffocating blackness. For what felt like hours, they descended, the silence pressing down on them like a vice. But as they reached the bottom, they finally saw it, the source of the hum, a massive chamber, unlike anything they had ever seen. The walls were lined with towering machines, their purpose unclear, but each one seemed to be pumping out an endless stream of energy. The room was vast, its scale almost impossible to comprehend, and in the center of it all, something that looked like a massive organic core pulsed with a sickly green light. The air felt wrong, dense, thick with something unnatural. And then, Voss realized the truth. "This is it," she whispered, her voice trembling. They had reached the heart of the enemy's operations. The prison hadn't just been a prison. It had been a testing ground, a place for experimentation, a place where the line between humanity and monstrosity had been blurred beyond recognition. That thing. "It's controlling everything," Carver said, awe and terror creeping into his voice. Suddenly, a sound broke through the tension, sharp and metallic. The core pulsed once, twice, and then a ripple of energy shot out from it, filling the room. The squad froze, their weapons raised, but there was nothing visible, nothing to target. And then it came. A figure standing in the center of the room, larger than any human, its form cloaked in shifting metallic armor. It was humanoid, but wrong. The light from the core reflected off its jagged edges, casting flickering shadows across its twisted silhouette. Its face was a jagged mask, half human, half machine, and its eyes, those glowing, malevolent eyes, fixed on Voss. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice said, deep and resonant, filling the chamber. It wasn't a machine's voice. It wasn't a creature's voice. It was both. "You think you can stop the future? The ascension of humanity?" Voss's heart pounded. This wasn't just the end of the prison. It was the end of everything. The prison, the creatures, the bioengineering experiments. It was all part of something much larger, something far more insidious. "The future is now," the creature said, its voice twisting with mockery. "You are but remnants of a broken age, a dying race. We will be reborn. Humanity is no longer yours to protect. We are the future." Voss's breath caught in her throat as the chamber shuddered again, and the massive creature began to step forward. It was the ultimate result of everything they had been fighting. The very thing humanity had inadvertently created through its own ambition. With a single, horrifying motion, the creature raised its arm, and the machinery around them came to life. The core pulsed with energy, and Voss felt the very air around them begin to warp and twist. "Prepare yourselves," the creature whispered. "This is the beginning of the end for you." What is this creature? What does it want from humanity? Can Voss and her squad stop it before it's too late? This isn't just a fight for survival anymore. This is a war for humanity's very soul. Captain Nadia Voss's voice was steely, her words cutting through the thick, oppressive atmosphere of the chamber. The creature, no, the abomination, stood. Before them, its twisted form emanating an energy that made the very air feel toxic. The hum of the machinery around them grew louder, the room pulsing with a strange, malevolent energy that seemed to distort reality itself. It was as if the entire room had become an extension of the creature's will, bending and warping in response to its power. The squad was already battered, on the edge of exhaustion, but Voss refused to show weakness. They had come this far, endured so much, and now they faced the ultimate test of their resilience. There was no going back. Not now. Not when humanity's future was at stake. "We take it down, or we die trying," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. She checked her weapons, but she knew that force alone might not be enough to defeat this thing. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. The creature's glowing eyes narrowed, and it took a step forward, the ground beneath it warping as though the laws of physics no longer applied. Its voice echoed through the chamber, cold and mocking. "You think you can defeat me? You think that your primitive weapons will stop the inevitable?" The creature's laughter was like nails on a chalkboard, cruel and devoid of any humanity. "I am the culmination of your mistakes, your hubris. You created me. You wanted to evolve. Now you will face the consequences." Voss's fists clenched. She refused to let the creature's words pierce her resolve. "We're not here to stop you. We're here to destroy you." Her voice was filled with cold determination, and for a moment it seemed as if the creature flinched. But it wasn't fear. No, it was something darker. The creature's arm raised again, and the core in the center of the chamber flared to life. A violent pulse of energy shot through the room, shaking the very foundations of the facility. The squad braced themselves, but the force was overwhelming. Voss felt her body slam against the floor as the shockwave rippled through her, her vision blurring as the air became thick with dust. "Captain, get up!" Carver's voice came through the haze, full of urgency. Voss forced herself to her feet, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature stood tall, its energy crackling around it like a storm. The squad was scattered, struggling to regain their bearings. But they couldn't afford to wait. The creature was already gathering its power for the next strike. If they didn't act now, they would never have another chance. "We can't fight it head on," Voss said, her mind racing. She could feel the pressure of time bearing down on her, and her instincts told her that their only hope lay in taking out the source of the creature's power, the core, the heart of the facility. They had to disable it, or everything they'd fought for would be in vain. "Delara, Carver, you're with me. The rest of you, keep the creature distracted. We'll hit the core from the inside. Go!" Delara and Carver nodded without hesitation, their faces set in grim determination. They had been through hell together, and now they were going to finish it. The squad split up, moving with precision despite the chaos around them. Voss, Carver, and Delara made their way toward the massive core in the center of the chamber. As they neared it, the air seemed to grow even more suffocating, the energy pulsing from the core threatening to overwhelm them. The power of the creature was intertwined with it, and disabling one would bring the other down. Voss didn't hesitate. She aimed her weapon at the core and fired, the blast shaking the room. The core sputtered, sending waves of energy crackling through the room, but it didn't falter. Voss cursed under her breath. "They needed more, much more. We need to overload it," she said, her mind working quickly. There was only one way to do this, and it was dangerous. Too dangerous. But it was their only shot. She turned to Carver and Delara. "Set the charges. We're going to blow the core." Meanwhile, the rest of the squad was engaged in a desperate battle with the creature. It was monstrous, its form shifting and warping with each movement, its power seeming to grow with every passing second. They fired at it, but the creature's armor absorbed the shots without flinching. It was more machine than man, more monster than anything they'd ever faced. "Keep it distracted. Keep it away from us." Voss barked through the comms as she and her team planted explosives around the core. Delara fired a shot into the creature's faceplate, causing it to stagger back, momentarily disoriented. Carver rushed to place the last of the charges, sweat pouring down his face as the countdown began. "Hurry up!" Voss's voice was a low growl, the urgency pressing down on them like a vice. Carver finished the last charge and backed away from the core. "We're ready. Just need a few more seconds." The creature, sensing what they were doing, turned its attention toward them with a deafening roar. It was too late. With a final scream, the creature surged forward, energy crackling around it. It raised its hand, preparing to strike, but it never got the chance. The explosive charges detonated all at once, lighting up the chamber in a flash of blinding light. "Now!" Voss shouted, diving for cover as the core exploded in a violent burst of energy. Cliffhanger ending. The explosion tore through the facility, the shockwave slamming them all to the ground. The force of it sent debris flying in every direction, and the chamber filled with blinding light. For a moment, everything went black. Voss's ears rang as she struggled to open her eyes. The world around her was a haze of dust and debris. She couldn't see anything clearly. The sound of groaning metal filled the air, and she could feel the heat radiating from the wreckage. "Voss? Captain, are you okay?" Carver's voice was faint but steady. Voss forced herself to sit up, her body aching from the blast. She looked around, her heart hammering in her chest. The creature, was it gone? The room was still alive with the crackle of fading energy, but there was no sign of the creature, no sign of its twisted, inhuman form. Had they done it? But then a deep, guttural laugh echoed from the wreckage. "You think you've won? This is only the beginning. You've only unleashed something far worse than you can imagine." Voss's heart sank as the voice reverberated through the chamber. "What is that?" Delara whispered, her voice barely audible. Voss turned toward the sound. She didn't have the strength to fight anymore. But the war wasn't over, not by a long shot. What new horrors await them in the next chapter? Will humanity triumph, or will they face an even darker enemy? Like, comment, we will never surrender, and subscribe to discover the final fate of humanity in the next chapter. The true horror. This can't be happening. Captain Nadia Voss's voice was strained as she pushed herself up from the rubble, every muscle in her body protesting. The blast had sent them all reeling, and her vision blurred as she tried to make sense of the sound, the deep, mocking laughter that still echoed through the crumbling chamber. But this wasn't just any laugh. It was a promise, a grim forewarning. The voice came again, its tone slow and deliberate, as if savoring their terror. "You really thought you had won? You killed one of us, but you've awakened the others. And now, humanity's fate is sealed." Voss's heart pounded in her chest as she pushed through the disorienting haze. She felt the weight of her squad's exhaustion, felt the raw, palpable fear in the air. The battle had already cost them so much, so many lives lost, so many sacrifices made. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Voss's eyes cut through the smoke and dust as the faint outline of a figure appeared in the wreckage ahead. The figure wasn't just an enemy. It was something far darker. It was more than just the twisted creature they had faced earlier. It was something worse. The silhouette was larger, shifting in and out of focus, as though the very fabric of reality couldn't fully contain it. "You've only scratched the surface of what's been created here." The voice was deeper now, the growl almost vibrating through the floor beneath them. "I am the product of your own making, your own ambition." Voss's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just some rogue bioengineering project. This thing. It was the next step in a twisted evolution. The figure fully emerged from the debris, its form barely human. Its massive frame rippled with strange organic armor, pulsing with an unnatural energy. It was human in a sense, but every inch of it radiated something far more alien, something beyond what they could ever comprehend. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, unsettling light, and its face was a mask of fury and mockery. "You've killed my brethren, but you've unleashed the true terror." Voss forced her voice to steady, her mind racing. What are you?" The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing on her. "I am what you would call the final evolution, the last step in humanity's journey. We are the next phase. The true heirs to the earth you left behind." Voss's mind screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The very foundation of the facility was crumbling, the abyss beneath them threatening to swallow everything. The squad was battered. Some of them were barely standing, their weapons already exhausted. But one thing burned in Voss's chest, a single, unshakable truth. They had come too far to stop now. Humanity had no choice but to fight. "You're wrong," Voss said, her voice steady with the weight of a soldier's resolve. "We're not going to let you win. Not now. Not ever." The creature laughed again, a low, rumbling sound that felt like it vibrated the very air around them. "You still think you can stop me?" Carver, Delara, and the others were beginning to rise, though each of them looked as if they had been pushed to the edge of their limits. Delara took a shaky step forward, her hand gripping her weapon tightly. "What now, Captain?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Voss's eyes darted toward the core of the chamber, the smoldering wreckage of what had once been the heart of the enemy's operations. The blast should have been enough to disable everything, but the creature before them. This was what had been controlling it all. This was the true power behind everything. The prison, the bioengineering, the monstrous creatures. They were just the beginning. "We need to shut it all down," Voss said, eyes locking with each of her squad mates. "We've got one last chance." The creature's form shifted again, its movements unnatural, as though it was no longer bound by human laws. With a flick of its hand, it sent a burst of energy slamming into the squad, throwing them to the ground. Voss gritted her teeth against the shock, pushing herself back up with a growl of defiance. "You are nothing but remnants of a broken world," the creature hissed, stepping closer, its form warping as it drew nearer. "You will never defeat us. Humanity's legacy is over. This world is ours now." Voss turned to her team, each of them gathering their strength. The time for running was over. It was time to finish this. Delara, Carver, with me. The rest of you, cover us. If we're going to take this thing down, we have to destroy the core, once and for all. The squad moved as one, despite their fatigue, despite the overwhelming odds. Voss, Carver, and Delara pressed forward toward the creature, their weapons blazing as they moved with all the speed and precision they could muster. But the creature was faster, more agile, and its energy crackled with power. It raised its hand again, a wave of raw energy surging toward them. "Fall back!" Voss screamed, pushing Carver out of the way just in time, the energy blast narrowly. Missing them. They were too close. The creature was too powerful. "Voss, we're not going to make it!" Carver yelled, struggling to maintain his balance. Voss, bloodied and bruised, didn't flinch. She didn't have time for fear. Humanity's future was hanging in the balance, and if she didn't act now, they would all die here, crushed beneath the weight of their own failure. She turned, running straight toward the core, a wild plan forming in her mind. Cliffhanger ending. As the squad regrouped, preparing for the final push, the ground began to tremble beneath their feet. The creature, seeing their approach, let out an ear-splitting roar that made the very walls shake. "You cannot stop what is coming," it screamed, its voice warping with fury. "You're already too late!" With a final desperate surge of strength, Voss and her squad reached the core, her hand shaking as she pressed the detonator. "The last charge, a final lethal weapon, now!" Voss shouted, but before the device could activate, a bright flash of light exploded from the core, and then everything went dark. What happens next? Will the squad survive the explosion? Can humanity still fight back, or is the world lost forever? This is it. Everything we've fought for. Everything we've lost. It comes down to this. The darkness was all-consuming. For a moment, it felt like time itself had frozen, as if the world had taken a collective breath before it was about to exhale its final, crushing blow. Captain Nadia Voss's mind raced as she tried to force her eyes open, her body still reeling from the shockwave of the explosion. The air was thick, heavy, like she was drowning in the weight of what had just happened. The core was still pulsing faintly in the distance, its energy crackling through the wreckage like a dying star. The ground beneath her feet shuddered, and she could feel the walls around her creaking and groaning under the strain. Voss, are you alive?" Carver's voice broke through the darkness, a lifeline. It was weak, strained, but it was enough to snap her back to reality. Voss's eyes fluttered open, her vision blurred by the remnants of the blast. She could barely hear the sound of her own breathing over the ringing in her ears. Slowly, she pushed herself up, her body protesting every movement. Her head was spinning, and for a moment she thought she might pass out again. "We've got to finish this," Voss whispered to herself, forcing her legs to stand. Every inch of her ached, but there was no time to rest. They were still in the heart of the enemy's territory. The creature, the true enemy, was still alive. And if they didn't act now, it would be the end for humanity. "Captain, we need you." Carver's voice, much closer now, was laced with desperation. Voss turned to see him and Delara emerging from the smoke, both of them battered but still standing. The rest of the squad was slowly picking themselves up, too, bleeding, exhausted, but alive. "We're not done yet," Voss said, her voice a low growl. "Get up! We finish this! Now!" The creature had stopped its thrashing. It had been thrown back by the explosion, its form twisted and broken, but it was still alive. Its eyes, glowing and furious, locked onto Voss, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. The creature's shape was still shifting, as if it couldn't decide whether it was human or something else. The pulse of energy from the core had caused its form to distort further, but it was still the enemy, the thing that had caused this hell. It was no longer just a physical fight. It was a war for the very soul of humanity. The squad gathered around. Voss, their weapons ready. Each of them knew that this might be their last stand. There was no retreat now. They either took the creature down, or they died here, their bodies and their struggle forgotten in the wreckage. The creature's voice, more insidious than before, filled the air. "You think you can stop me? You think your petty human resistance means anything to me? You are ants before a god. You were never meant to survive this. I am the future. You're already extinct." Voss stepped forward, her eyes narrowing in hatred. "You're wrong. You're not the future. You're a nightmare we're going to end. Now." The final battle began. The creature surged forward, its form distorting as it leapt toward them. The squad opened fire, their weapons spitting rounds at the monstrosity, but each shot seemed to barely scratch the surface. The creature's armor, if it could even be called that, was alive, shifting with every blow, adapting and evolving faster than they could react. Delara screamed as a burst of energy shot toward her, slamming her back into the wall. Carver rushed to her side, but the creature was already moving, its claws extended, preparing to strike. Voss didn't hesitate. She dove forward, firing relentlessly at the creature's exposed flank. The blast knocked it off course, but it only slowed for a moment. The energy it radiated was overwhelming, almost suffocating. "We need to destroy the core," Voss shouted. It's the source of its power. If we take it down, we take him. Down. Carver, Delara, and the others nodded grimly, understanding the plan. They had one final chance. The creature was too strong, but the core was its lifeblood. They just needed to get to it. The squad moved in unison, their every step a gamble. The creature lashed out at them, energy crackling around its body as it tried to stop them. But they weren't going to stop. Not now. Voss, Carver, and Delara led the charge toward the core, but the creature was right behind them. Every step was a fight for survival. The ground cracked beneath their feet as they neared the heart of the prison. They could see it now, the glowing pulse of the core, the source of the creature's power. The creature roared, its body thrashing with a violent force, but the squad pushed forward. They had no choice. They had to destroy it. With one final desperate lunge, Voss reached the core and slammed the detonator into place. "Now!" she shouted, her voice hoarse with the effort. Cliffhanger ending. Just as the detonator activated, the creature let out a deafening scream. The core surged with energy, sending shockwaves through the chamber. But something changed. The core pulsed, flickering erratically, as though the explosion was reacting to the creature's rage. "You think you've won?" The creature hissed, its form shifting in impossible ways. "You think this is the end? You're wrong. This is only the beginning. We are inevitable." The explosion went off, and the world exploded in a flash of light. Will humanity finally defeat the creature, or will it survive and claim the world? Can Voss and her squad survive the final showdown? To everyone who's been following this story, thank you. If you want to see the next chapter faster, hit like, comment, never surrender, and subscribe so we can keep this epic battle going. The battle's not over yet, but we've come so far. Thank you for sticking with us through this epic journey. But here's the truth. This channel is slowly going down day by day. And it's because so many of you are enjoying the story but not leaving a comment. If you're loving the story but not interacting, it's tough for us to keep going strong. Hitting the like button helps us keep the channel alive and gives us the support we need to keep bringing you these incredible stories. Every like matters more than you think. Comment below with your thoughts, theories, or even just how you're enjoying the ride. Your comments are what keep us motivated and show us that you want more. If you're not commenting, it's harder to tell if you're actually enjoying the content, and that directly impacts how we can continue growing. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss the next chapter and to be part of this amazing journey. By subscribing, you're helping the channel grow and keeping this project alive. This channel thrives because of you. So if you're loving the story, please take just a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is the lifeblood of this channel, and without it, we can't keep going. Let's keep this adventure alive, together.